Hello, my name is Tiffany Damaris, and I'm a doctoral student at Louisiana State University. And I'm here today to present to you my presentation entitled The Modernization of Financing Stadia. This is a history of Division I football subdivision stadia from the 19th century to the present. The purpose of this study is to identify and to better understand how American college football stadia were financed over time, and to recognize the differences and similarities regarding these financing approaches between institutions of the Division I football subdivision, and then to ultimately contrast them against the abundant literature that has been produced on the professional sport industry. Through this, I have employed modernization as a theoretical lens to explain these activities and changes, both past and predicted. We are also interested in detecting environmental influences, institution-level opinion leaders, and any interorganizational relationships that might have helped to finance FBS stadia construction. The practical goal here is to offer recommendations and recognize expectations for future stadia construction or renovation consideration. So what is modernization? In order to be able to understand what we're doing here, we need to understand modernization first. So it's a research construct that we use to explain the evolution of changes in society and organizations and to predict future shapes, patterns, and construction. So modernization integrates three processes, which is the modernization of structures, such as physical buildings around us, the modernization of public beliefs, and then also actual popular mentalities. Associated with this, we are interested in advancing technology, improving job specialization and new occupations, increasing standardization, rationality, which is concerned with safety and security, efforts to reduce and remove dysfunction, philanthropy, and to improve the environment and enhance comfort. This research is a valuable contribution to developing modernization literature overall, as well as potentially presenting financial modernization as a unique type. Financial modernization would complement both reflexive and ecological modernization. The methods. So archival work was collected using multiple primary documents. For these studies, primary documents included presidential papers, financing documents, bond retirement schedules, feasibility studies, newspapers, and letters of correspondence. Secondary sources that were utilized included history books, journal articles, and newspapers, as well as many other databases. Following the collection of primary and secondary sources, all items receive an internal and an external source criticism. Within this point, sources are triangulated to reduce the impact of dissonant data and to confirm information presented by individual sources whenever possible. This is a very important step in the historical research method, as we use primary sources and secondary sources and piece them together in order to create a generalized picture of what was happening at the time. Subsequent themes and information are categorized using timelines and Excel spreadsheets. And so what we did is we took the data that we found in these primary sources, and then we were able to parcel it out into specific time periods, into specific types of financing, and then use that to create charts and other things to better understand what was going on and trends over time. So the sample that we currently have for this study includes 31 FBS institutions. I have built on my previous work using the entire Southeastern Conference and doubled the amount of schools that we looked at to include all of the ones listed here. The results. And so what we found was that FBS members employed a multitude of financing approaches that could occur all at one time. So no particular project employed only one type of financing. Some of them used two, three, or even four types of financing to come up with the money to be able to create these venues. The presence of different financing eras within the concept of modernization. So as stadiums grew more complex, the financing also needed to become more complex in order to match what was needed in the new venue. Early football stadia made use of student labor and faculty expertise. For example, engineers and architects often waived their fees. They also utilized alumni gifts and gate receipts to fund stadium construction. And so in the early days, a lot of schools would allow their students to raise funds for themselves, and then they would go out and physically build the grandstands that were used to to view football games. As enrollments grew over time, so too did alumni pools that could be used to pull money to generate funds for future construction. While later periods also featured alumni gifts, the development of foundation offices to fundraise for the building of stadia became much more prevalent. And so schools actually incorporated these groups of alumni that would donate money themselves and go out and connect with other alumni to get them to donate as well. Featured within foundation offices was the effort to solicit gifts, recruit bond purchasing, and lobby for state legislation committees. So in addition to getting monetary gifts from the alumni, they also were able to encourage the alumni and also members of the community to actually purchase bonds to be able to facilitate construction. And then they also went into state legislatures to try and get them to donate, to try and get them to appropriate funds for the building of these venues. From a legislative perspective, other sources of financing came from the Works Progress Administration or the Public Works Administration. And so between 1935 and 1940, a lot of venues were built using money from these programs, which was a part of the New Deal, which infused money into the economies of these schools during the Great Depression. Finally, student fees and dorm rentals were utilized among other items over time, such as university appropriations, debt financing, and business partnerships. So prevalent in the South, some schools actually built dormitories within their stadiums to be able to get state appropriated money that they would not have otherwise been able to get. And then they were able to use the fees from the students living in those dorms to further help with construction efforts, as well as other university appropriated money, debt financing, where they would just take out loans to be able to cover the construction costs, and business partnerships. So whether that was between in-kind gifts or naming rights or other things where businesses were donating money or advertising, those will all be considered business partnerships. As you can see from this chart, we have the type of funds that were utilized, and then we have it broken down into eras. So in 1903 is when the first permanent stadia was built, and so that is why we chose to cut that off there. And then as you can see, we go through kind of at a 10-year mark between the 1930 and 1945 is where you'll see most of the Works Progress Administration. That's why that was cut off in the middle there. And everything else pretty much goes at a 10-year mark. So you can see also here, this is not a total list of projects. Every time that a project was completed using a specific type, that was given a 1. And so, you know, a school may have done 3 renovations within the period of 1904 to 1929. If they used monetary gifts for all 3, it was just a 1. And so the data is not necessarily, so this data here is not total projects used, but it does allow us to see what types were employed during what time and at what level between the schools that we saw. And so so you'll see here, you know, the most construction was happening between 1904 and 1929, which is consistent with the permanent era. And then you can see here between 1930 and 1945, that is where all of the Works Progress Administration funding happened. And so there's 14 instances of this. And so again, if one school during that time used the WPA more than once, it wouldn't be highlighted here, but we can see that that was the big push at the time. And you can see over time some of the other things that were employed. Gate receipts kind of start to trail off there at the end. Monetary gifts is always big. And so sometimes we don't necessarily have the data to show whether it's specific monetary gifts or alumni associations, but alumni associations were definitely a really big thing that we noticed within the SEC. And so that helps that number grow. Discussion. There are several motivating factors that were shared, but also distinct to each school. And so regional and peer group differences, no matter what conference a school was in, there's always going to be other schools in that conference that schools are attempting to keep up with. And so you're always trying to keep up with conference and regional peers. So we saw this when I did my presentation about the SEC specifically, but also, you know, Baylor was in the Southwest Conference, and at some point they were considered the poor cousin of the Southwest Conference, and then they wind up becoming the forefront of the Big 12, where they're leading the way in the largest locker room and advanced playing fields and other things like that. And so it kind of is, and so it's this arms race that is continuing to make schools always want to continue to pull ahead based on the others around them. Then they also have shared goals. So they're all trying to promote their college, town, and institution as legitimate and modern. And so in the beginning, the way that you signaled legitimacy and modernity was to have a stadium on your campus. That was used as a way to recruit students, to cultivate media attention, and to develop alumni relationships, which then would produce revenues, as well as the future arms race. This will continue to serve both internal stakeholders, but external corporate partnerships and the wealthy, and this will be a focus. Also, high-tech partnerships will be important for live and remote fans. Obviously, we're going through COVID-19 now, and sometimes people can't get to the games. And so we're going to see a lot of innovation that's going to allow people to be able to have a much different experience, even if they cannot go to the game. And even so for those who can go to the game. Environmental factors, so student clubs, newspapers, and opinion leaders, they mattered in what decisions were made. Students pushed because they wanted to have stadiums on campus. Students worked and raised money so that they could build grandstands on campus. Students physically built grandstands on campus. The newspaper showed how the townspeople were feeling about these venues and how much money they were willing to put up to build venues within these towns. Tensions, the transition from wooden to permanent. And so again, as you transition from a wooden venue that is susceptible to fire and other safety risks, and you raise money to put in a more permanent venue, you're seeing that legitimizes the university. The Great Depression and World War II had significant environmental effects. As enrollments declined because of the war, the universities had to limit their spending. And also during the war, there were no resources to pull from to build venues. And so they limit spending and they prompt a search for new funding sources. And so because they don't have money from enrollment, because people are strapped for cash during the Great Depression and things like that, they're trying to find other different ways to be able to raise money that are different from how they were before. And then varying threats to relocate. So unique to college sports, you have neutral site games. And this is differentiated from professional sports where, Arkansas is in Lafayette and they don't have an airport. They don't have a great road system. And so people are not going to travel to Lafayette. And so they play their games for a while in Little Rock, which is the capital of Arkansas, in a War Memorial Stadium there. And so those neutral site games allow the schools to capitalize on where the populations are and things like that. However, this changes over time as technology gets better, as roads become better, parking is a thing. And so schools are able to then say, okay, no, now I want to play at home. And I don't want the state to tell me that I have to play, in the Capitol. And I don't want to have to play at a neutral site. I want to be able to capitalize on the gate receipts that I can get with my on-campus venue. The contribution to modernization. Reflexive modernization is related to the management of risk. And so that's safety and security and other things like that. Ecological modernization is related to a mastery of the environment. So with these two, we see the transition from wooden to permanent is a way to mitigate risk. We see the implementation of ticket booths and fencing and stuff as a way to stop people from doing certain things, and that would be a risk, but also an environmental factor. There have been stadiums that had to divert rivers in order to, help with irrigation or where they wanted the field to be set and things like that. That's a mastery of the environment. Domed facilities, which, are not really that big in college sports, but those are mastery of the environment. If it's too cold, if it rains a lot, you put a dome on your facility. Financial modernization complements both as it connects both risk and a mastery of the environment and changes to various financing strategies and tactics. So again, as you try and negate risk, as you try and master the environment, it becomes more expensive. And so you need to modernize the way that you finance these projects to be able to accommodate the complexity that is coming. As management of risk and environment occurs, so does the modernization of financing. And so again, we're going from less complex to more complex. It involves policy development and policy changes. And so again, you go from using student fees, and then sometimes now schools don't use student fees anymore. You go from having state appropriations to now there are laws that are trying to get rid of state appropriations to build athletic venues. And so these are all changes that are going to happen, and as society becomes more reflexive, they're going to change. And we also in the sport administration need to be able to adapt to these changes. And so when state appropriations are not able to be used anymore, we move over to athletic foundations or revenue bonds or other things. And then the rise of public interest, the rise of private interest, the rise of new ideologies. And so again, people used to spend state tax dollars on building venues, and now people don't think that that's something we should be doing anymore. And so that's a new ideology. You have third-party contributors or facilitators / specialists, government entanglement. So again, laws that they might make, security market options and debt management, stable economy or a pursuit of stabilization. So this is a major point of the Works Progress Administration. The economy was unstable, and as a way for the government to try and stabilize the economy, they infused money. We see that happening right now during COVID-19. The government is trying to give money to businesses to be able to stabilize the economy, and so that was the main purpose of the Works Progress Administration. And then banking options and competition, so debt financing and things like that. Opportunities and practical implications. Universities could take a page out of their past, and so they could use faculty and students as a resource to help with them with construction projects and decisions. A lot of schools have engineering programs and architecture programs. This is a really great opportunity to provide educational and experiential learning opportunities and reduce the costs. Obviously, you would want somebody to oversee this, and that's where the faculty comes in, but it would not only be beneficial to the students in these programs, but also as a cost saving to the athletic department. More universities could build or renovate with the assistance from foundation offices. So again, we saw that this was really big in the SEC, but I didn't find that much in the other schools that very pointedly stated foundation offices are helping us build. So for example, here at LSU, some of the more recent buildings venues for athletics have been built using money that was generated from the foundation offices. But more importantly, the money was raised prior to breaking ground. And so you have less debt financing, and you're not always paying back the building with future funds. You have the funds before you go to break ground. Also, previously in-kind gifts such as construction materials and business partnerships have been helpful in reducing building costs. So these are avenues that may be revived in a mutual beneficial way because companies can write off their donations on their taxes. They can get free advertising in return for their donations, as well as positive public relations for the donor, and then in turn a cost savings for the university. They could also implement personal seat licenses to help fund future renovations and construction. Much like professional sports do when they build new venues, you pay a one-time fee, depending on whatever the market value might be, to own the seat, and then that allows you to have first dibs on purchasing season tickets or other tickets for events that are in that venue. And that is an easy way to infuse cash into athletic departments and to fund construction efforts. And finally, selling naming rights to stadia, which Colorado State and Kentucky have both done, might be a way to, again, generate a very large amount of cash right away. A complement might be to allow businesses to sponsor sections or zones within the stadium to increase advertising revenue and to decrease debt service that we need to do on these venues. And so, maybe you sell the naming rights to the student section. Now it's, the local bank student section or things like that. Businesses do this in the professional sports, and so it's something that potentially college sports can also take a page from. Okay, so if you have any questions for me, this is my contact information here. Again, I'm Tiffany Demiris. I'm a doctoral student at Louisiana State University, and this is my email, and I will answer any questions that you might have.